Hey everybody, welcome back to our Academy video series. I'm Cass with College of Lore.
I'm the Penitent with College of Lore.
You probably, I hope, watched the first part of our DMing Academy set of videos.
If you haven't, we've either made a terrible mistake with our upload schedule,
or you're weird.
Yeah, or
go watch the other one first.
You might be confused.
You might be. Maybe you don't read numbers good. That's okay. Some people have a hard time with that.
2 is a bigger number than 1.
2 is a smaller number than 1. Maybe you aren't very good at numbers.
I forgot.
You had a silly moment.
So, when we last left our heroes, on the last exciting episode of Dragon Ball Z...
No, wait. We can't say that.
Oh, on the last
That's not what this is.
On the last exciting episode of...
Dragon Ball College of Lore.
Yeah, on Dragon College of Lore,
we were talking about DMing.
Yes.
And one of the big things that we kind of hit on last was making people comfortable, that was kind of the end of the last video, making people comfortable with changes you make to their characters. But before that we were talking about immersion, and I kind of want to go back and touch on that now.
Yeah, briefly before we go into immersion, can I talk about one more thing about making people comfortable?
Please.
So I've said, you can add little backstory tweaks. I said that a bit earlier. You know this person. Some of the best characters, someone's superior officer in a now defected branch of a cult.
Yes.
Or someone's a rival. Great things to add that stuff in.
Yeah.
Do not add a backstory tweak that they would not otherwise do.
Yeah.
I have played with a player who made a Robin Hood noble type thief. Steal from the rich, give to the poor. Who got a DM note from the DM before the campaign started saying, as a thief, you tried to steal this, jewel from a museum and got arrested, and are now being forced to do this thing, plot-relevant thing, getting the party together, as a result. And the two things that this character wrote in their backstory specifically were, has never been caught, and only steals what is absolutely necessary from people who can afford it.
To give to people who can't.
Does not have any ambition to be the greatest thief possible.
And the DM just ignored that, which is not a good thing to do. Don't do that. Whatever you change, make it logical with what they've already written out. Don't make anything contradictory or counterintuitive.
Yeah, run it by the players. Talk to your players. Anyway,
talk to your players. Be like, hey, I'm going to throw in this rival that you have. How do you feel about this person's personality and existence? And you can have them have a dialogue with you about that.
And it's fascinating when that person turns into one of the most important parts of that character's backstory.
Yeah, it's almost like we've had that.
It's almost like that's happened. It's almost like these characters are...
They ended up kissing.
Yeah, they ended up kissing, or being cousins, not the same character. Not the same
I don't know which one you were talking about. I was thinking about maybe an entirely different thing.
I'm talking about two characters.
Okay.
One of them, they ended up kissing. One of them, they ended up being cousins.
Yes.
Those
are not the same.
No.
Those are not the same two people. Those are two people and then two different people.
Brianna is the first one, and the second one is List.
Yes.
Parallax.
Yes. I'm sure some of that will come up in Game Tales later.
Yes.
But yeah, those are not the same. We did not have two people who found out they were cousins and had also been dating.
That would be a really shitty thing. Don't do that to
Don't do that to your players. That's not comfortable for people. But yeah, tying in those things and creating new things to kind of connect them to the world is a great thing to do. You should definitely do it. Just make sure everyone's comfortable with it. Talking on, again, we're going back to immersion now, talking on the subject of making your world feel real and enjoyable. I have a lot of tips and tricks for that, for cities, for people, for just about anything you can imagine. I will give you some of those tips and tricks because I really like using them and it might help you. We talked a little about some of the NPCs I've come up with that have been very, one-off NPCs that I gave, one random trait to, and then it evolved into this whole thing.
Yeah.
I like to give every NPC I create, whether it's pre-planned or on the spot, just one little detail about them that's different or unique or just relevant to the world at hand, even if not to the players. It doesn't have to be a plot twist or a secret. It can literally just be, this person is depressed.
Yeah.
Or this person is celebrating something and they're in a good mood, you know?
Yeah, or this person, this town guard is an hour and a half away from the end of their what has been a double shift.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be deep, it doesn't have to be detailed. It's just a starting point, and then when your players dig into that starting point, that's when you build off of it. I like to kind of set a scene, say the player characters are entering a temple to some god or some power. It's, you can decide, first of all, is this a populated temple, is this abandoned, what's the deal? But if it's a place where they're going to potentially meet someone, figure out the kind of person that they might meet there, and that's the kind of thing you can vaguely do beforehand when you pre-plan places that they could go. You can say, there is a temple in this town. Who would they meet there? Would they meet just some random acolyte? Would they meet someone who's being given shelter there for the night? Would they meet a cleric or paladin of the god the temple is devoted to? And then you ask yourself just a couple of questions at most. I would never really reasonably ask myself more than like 2 or 3 going into a session, because it would be too much to manage.
Yes.
And it would distract me. But a couple of kind of example questions. What is that person like? Just list like 1 or 2 like 1-word personality traits. Whatever space they're in, whether that's a tavern or a temple or a hole in the middle of the road, how is where they are relevant to them, and how is that affecting them at the moment? What makes them relevant to the story or makes them irrelevant to the story? You don't need to have all those questions. You don't need to ask those questions. Just come up with maybe a couple of things that you can, as they're walking in, as you're setting the scene, kind of run through in your mind, like, what questions can I ask myself to give this character one little thing? And I'll give an example of something that vaguely came up in a game once, although I'll tweak it a little for this purpose. Say your players enter a temple to a god of knowledge. There are several of those in the 5e Pantheon. We're going to do a video on the 5e Pantheon next week.
Whoa.
But maybe this god of knowledge, this temple has like instead of just being a place of worship, they have this library space where not only do they store books and pieces of knowledge relevant to this god, but they also just keep knowledge there in general. This temple doubles as a library. And you kind of decide that as they're going in. You're like, hey, here's this cool detail about this place. This doubles as a library because it's a god of knowledge. And then you find someone in there who is maybe a student who has come to study at this temple because they feel that the magic of that god of knowledge helps them study better here. And that is how you give one place something distinct about it, and one person in that place something distinct about them. And it can be really simple. It can be just one thing. And it can be simpler than that. That's just kind of off the top of my head when I was writing stuff down for this. That's something I came up with.
And it really can turn into a whole thing.
Yeah. I mean, you could have a conversation with that student for hours about, what are they studying? How does this place actually do that? Do you think that's a legitimate thing? Is it a placebo effect? Your players can start digging into this student's experience at this temple, and maybe they find out something unrelated. Maybe they find out something that points them toward a plot point, Maybe they came here looking for resources in the library, and the student's like, well, hey, I just studied something related to that concept last week, the bookshelf is over there.
Yeah.
You can use that as a tool, as your players delve deeper into whatever is up with this.
And your players will unexpectedly fall in love with things, and that's so good. Fall in love with characters.
Make them relevant if your players want them to be relevant.
And don't be afraid to lean on tropes.
Yeah.
Is the other thing. Lean on old established tropes. They exist.
There's a difference between a trope and a cliche. A cliche is a trope overdone poorly. A trope is just a storytelling device.
One of my favorite things is the story comes up in the Dread Lady of Barovia story. Of these 2 town guards who are very typical trope. Mm-hmm. Trope-wise in that they're kind of a younger, more fresh kind of guard who's a bit more enthusiastic about things, a bit more professional, and an older, grizzled person who's just kind of at the end of their career, end of their line here, and just want to be eventually ready to retire.
Yeah, they're about done.
Yes, and that was really fun. It was really fun when the crux of the Dread Lady thing happened, and then both those characters were women now.
Yeah,
and how that affected the dynamic.
Yeah,
all that stuff. Yeah.
And you'd be surprised how much people will get attached to literally the randomest stuff ever. And if you can, you should pull that in. It's a great idea to have just one little thing that makes someone relevant, and then you build on it later. Especially if this is one of those situations, like we've said, where an action taken by the characters changes something in not just their immediate setting, but in the setting of that town where they met those people, or in the setting of that person's family in some way, or, it can all kind of link back together. There are a ton of ways that you can just kind of throw something small in to give someone something interesting. And like I said, not all of the NPCs and, places you come up with have to be relevant. One-off things are great, subplots are great, but all of that stuff, it doesn't have to be relevant to the huge overarching storyline to make it fun for the players to interact with, and in fact, having things that aren't relevant to that makes your world feel more real. It's not just this one singular moving plotline. It is now other people have lives both relating to and not relating to this plotline. And whatever you do affects that, and other things they do also affect that, and their lives change with or without you. People's lives go on, whatever your players do. Sometimes lives stop because of what your players do. But the idea of it is, give your players things to connect with that aren't just the story. Make your world feel real by building that out. On the flip side of that, and this is one of those things where I'm just gonna say, do this but don't do too much of it several times about several different things in this video series. You can flesh out a lot of details in your world, but fleshing out too much of everywhere you go, information bloat and decision paralysis. Your players will have too much to do and not enough to do, and not enough idea of what to do with it, or too many ideas of what to do, and not enough specific direction to help them narrow that down.
It is so much more useful and so much better for the players to not just get bombarded with information.
If they won't keep it in their mind,
no,
and it won't help them decide what to do.
If you have, this town guard, 1, 2, 3 personality traits listed down, maybe a vague age, gender, thing like that, versus this whole life story.
Yeah. You don't need to drop that on your players, and most people wouldn't. So keep that kind of realistic in that way.
Flesh out the characters that are going to be relevant, and just give a little bit of tweaking to those that aren't. And if they become relevant, you can go back in your planning and make them more fleshed out.
You can even switch their role with someone else that you had planned if you wanted to.
We have developed so many little things as we've gone along, of just these little character ideas. I think you told me the other day, you hadn't planned much for one of the NPCs in one of our games until you sat down and you considered what they would see in an area that showed you visions.
Yes, that whole thing, and then all of a sudden I had a character arc for them, and it changed a lot of things in a very interesting way. For both that character and the player characters.
And you can do that. You don't have to have it from the off. And honestly, having it from the off can lead to giving your players too much information.
Or giving them things that eventually won't work with the changes they decide to make to the story.
Yes. That is actually something I struggle with even now as a DM, is giving too much information. Because I come from more than D&D, I come from a world of stage play and script writing. I come from a background where my mother was a English and theater teacher. And she's awesome. I know how to talk, I know how to develop backstories, but I know how to do it too much. And I still to this day struggle with information bloat.
Sometimes you give people more than they need, and it becomes overwhelming, and it makes it hard to enjoy.
Yeah, more than they need, more than they want, and I think
more than is relevant.
Which kind of leads me to another thing in DMing, which is understand your flaws and accept that you have flaws.
And you can just kind of try to work around them, Sometimes you'll just lore dump on your player characters, and your players by extension, and they'll be like, okay, so what part of that do I actually need? And you can sum that up. You can kind of bring that down to a manageable level once you've told them all this stuff. If you really want to lore dump, make sure they'll tolerate it, but you can do that and then say, here's what you actually need to know. You can kind of level that down.
Yes, and a big thing that I kind of looked at was, it's okay to learn in yourself, it's okay to grow, it's okay to be not new at this, and still need to grow.
Perfection is the enemy of growth, or whatever.
Yes. My big thing is, it always has been, adding too many NPCs.
You always give me and a lot of people that we play with. You give a lot of things to a lot of people, and we always end up having, like, massive parties.
Yes, because I flesh out so much, and, you know, fleshing out things is good, but I take it too far sometimes, and I understand that myself.
And it's not a bad thing, you just have to adapt the rest of your DMing style to deal with, like, 20-person parties sometimes.
You know, a game that I had recently played, I realized that, like, okay, I'd done a lot of prep for these characters. It's important to know that these two villainous characters are in a romantic relationship.
Yes.
And how these villainous characters all kind of vaguely met and what they come from. The Crown Royal of this land, the person who will one day be the king of it, is a closeted trans man. That's hugely important to know.
Yes.
The royal protector having a kind of unrequited crush on the king, that's less important. Like, it's a good note to have.
But it may not ever come up.
Yes.
And you don't need to put it out immediately.
And you need to understand that you'll have notes that do not come up.
Yeah.
A lot of things is...
I write stuff down in my DM notes, and I'm like, well, that's getting scrapped 4 sessions later when you guys are like, we're doing something totally different.
Yeah, they will get scrapped, they will change your... They will change as your game changes.
And again, what I've started doing, and I need to make a separate document for this. This video is going to remind me to make a separate document to store all of the game notes that I have already used that are no longer relevant for me to keep in my note document. Keep all your unused ideas or your used ideas that you could bring up again somewhere safe, just like you keep your base DM notes somewhere safe. Never scrap an idea entirely.
Yeah, and it's not horrible to have, you know, these random notes about NPCs. Just, like, don't prioritize spending your time on that, and do not give it all to your players immediately. And
understand that it may never be relevant to your players depending on how things go.
Yeah.
That NPC could die before that ever even comes close to coming up. You gotta keep stuff like that in mind.
There's something you said for pacing yourself, too, you know? When it comes to the idea of, like, I've had experiences before where I've given the PCs 4 extremely relevant NPCs in the same town. And while that works sometimes, it also...
It can be a little overwhelming.
Yes. You know, I get to a point of, a really example that I am embarrassed about to this day.
Was this with me?
Yes.
Okay.
There was a carnival setup. And the first time I had done this setup for you, the carnival had consisted of 3 important people.
Yes.
And that was fine, but I got to another take in the same setting, and I'm like, well, a carnival can't run on 3 people.
Yeah.
So what if I write 12?
Yeah. And it became a lot to keep up with very quickly.
And at some point we got into a combat where all of them were there, and I'm just like, Jesus Christ, this isn't manageable.
Yeah.
And you talked to maybe 4 of them.
Yeah.
It netted you talking to about 1 more person.
Yeah.
So...
And you added a little bit too much,
Yeah.
and it became not all usable. Yeah.
Yeah, and you understand at a certain point that even if the guard, you know, the players are town guards, maybe, that sort of things, they're going to interact with, there are 120 people in the guard department. Have ideas for, like, 5 of them.
And just shuffle them in whenever it becomes relevant.
You know, 3 hugely important people in this carnival, yes. Just assume those 3 people are there, and there are, like, 10 to 20 people in the background.
Yeah. You don't need to have the details on everyone involved.
Yeah. Which kind of ties into the over-preparing thing we mentioned earlier. Just... Yeah.
Basically, all of DMing is, do this, but don't do it too much.
Yes.
So many things in DMing come down to that idea.
Just, everything...
Don't overdo it.
Everything in moderation.
Everything in moderation except for moderation. You should have a lot of moderation.
Yes. Dungeon moderation.
Dungeon moderator. That's what I am. I'm a dungeon moderator.
DM stands for Discord mod?
Yeah. That's me. I'm both of those things.
Yeah.
I am a dungeon master and a Discord mod. Hey, you guys should join our Discord. You can do that on our Patreon. We're gonna have that. That's gonna be a thing.
You can also join our Patreon on our Discord.
Yeah. Go back and forth. Do both. It's great.
Just click back and forth between the 2 links for like an hour every day and just see what happens. You might get a prize.
You won't. But you could.
Yeah. Legally, I can't say you will.
But also, who knows? It's a mystery.
Never say never, right?
Yeah. Except that you just did. But yeah, to kind of talk about the things we're supposed to be talking about, when you're fleshing stuff out, when you're trying to do things but not too much, this is kind of where I circle back to the yes and the no but, which is something that I definitely wanted to talk about more in this video. I don't remember if we talked at the beginning of
We did a bit,
the
yes,
last
we touched on it in the last one.
Yeah. So, something that I learned when I was in, like, high school theater 1 as my, like, one of my electives was improv is usually a yes and kind of thing. And especially when you're doing a game like D&D, you want to add to whatever your players are experiencing as much as you can. If you can give them a yes of any kind, I think that's usually ideal. You usually want to be able to encourage your players to interact by giving them something they want out of that interaction.
It shuts your players down if they're like, oh hey, is there anyone in this tavern who looks at all suspicious?
And you're like,
and you just
no.
Yeah.
No, they're just all people. But you can also, in a situation where no one there is suspicious, but someone there might be interesting, that is where the idea of a no, but comes in.
Yeah.
And we talked about that earlier.
The idea of, like, I wouldn't say suspicious, but you see this man in a very long, ostentatious coat who has a group of young women kind of gathered around listening to him speak.
Yeah.
That's so much better than just saying, no one here is suspicious.
Yeah. You have your players walk into a tavern. These characters are just kind of here to get the lay of the land. And if they're looking for someone suspicious, maybe you can throw that in. You could even go as far as to say, do I see this person who I'm looking for who's a villain or who's relevant to my backstory or who we are looking for some reason or another? And you can say, yes, and this is what they're doing, or yes, and you also see this other thing that's relevant. Or you can say, no, but here's this other thing you see that might interest you. And it all depends. Ideally, you'll kind of learn the time and place for both of those things, because sometimes they're interchangeable and sometimes they're super not. If your players are looking for one specific thing, and it should be in an area like this, there's no real reason to say, no, it's not here.
And the worst thing you can do is, your players go out on a fetch quest.
Mm-hmm.
They walk to the location of this object.
Yeah.
The object is sitting in a room in this place.
Yeah.
They pick it up. They walk back.
Yeah. There's no excitement to it.
The idea of, like, is this like gem of myth still in this room?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But it's being held by the villain.
Yeah. Yes, but someone else is, like, climbing out the window with it, like, strapped to their hip as we speak.
Yes.
As you enter this room. Yes and no but and yes but are also all great tools. You should always, whatever you're doing, whether it's a yes or a no answer, you should be adding some other detail that furthers the plot. That's such a huge way to keep things moving.
And the important thing is, not just with this roleplay stuff, not just with little things like little story beats and RPG beats.
Yeah.
It's important to do that with failed rolls as well.
Yes. That is a really good point. It's not all about the narrative in the way of just this is what's happening. Sometimes you can take a success or a fail and say, if your player is trying to sneak in somewhere, you can say, they fail their stealth roll, and that sucks. And you can say, they're seen. Obviously, they fail a stealth roll, someone sees them. If they're like, oh god, did the person I was trying to hide from see me? You can say, yes, but, something along the lines of, like, yes, they see you, but they notice something about you, or something behind you, that presses their interest more. You can say, yes, and they're really, really mad, or yes, and they knew you were coming, and that's why you failed the roll, because they had something there to expect you. Or you can say, no, they don't see you, but someone worse does. Or someone more interesting does. There's so many different directions you can go with a single failed or succeeded roll.
Yeah.
Go above and beyond with not just saying, you fail your stealth check, you get seen, blah blah blah. Or you pass your perception check, you see the item you're looking for, go get it. You can build on that.
Yeah, and the idea of just, like, you look at the kind of failed rolls, you know, you can, it's so simple to be, you picked a lock, okay, you failed, pick the lock.
Yeah.
Let's find another way to open it.
Yeah.
The idea of even, like, you failed to pick the lock, and an alarm sounds.
Yeah.
Or you succeed at picking the lock,
but an alarm sounds.
But an alarm's lock. Or you succeed at picking the lock, but you hear a voice behind you.
Yeah.
Adding those little complications into things. You know, I've heard of mechanics, and I like the mechanic of asking a player, hey, I will give you inspiration if you'd rather fail this roll.
Yeah, that's a great way to do that. Baiting them into a failure that might lead them to something interesting by promising an opportunity for success later.
As a player, I think failures are just as, if not more interesting than successes.
And I agree as a DM, because there are so many times where a roll that ends in disaster creates an entirely new piece of the puzzle and piece of the story for you as a DM and for your friends and party members as players.
Yeah, and the other thing is be descriptive with it. If you have, for example, like a missed sword attack, it's one thing to say, you swing your sword and you miss.
Yeah.
Next initiative turn. Versus, you know, you run up to the enemy you're facing and you swing your sword, but it kind of glances off of their armor and you hear this reverberating sound of metal as your arm kind of shakes and feels sore for a moment as you ready yourself for your second attack.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
But
it means the same thing, but it's descriptive. It adds life and energy and momentum to what's happening, and it's so easy with a failed roll especially to kill momentum.
Yes.
And if you give them a reason why that momentum does not disappear, even if it's just describing it in more detail and saying, you know, here's what the follow-up for that can now look like based on that, you know. Say your player, you know, like you said, they missed their first attack and they crit their second one. You know, your arm is like shaking and sore, and you shake it off and you go for your second attack, and this person kind of is in position to have kind of had their armor glance off your first attack, but now that you're here, you see that when you hit it the first time, you may not have cut through their armor, but you dented it, and now there's this little chip in the armor, and you kind of go for it and you swing your weapon into that chip in their armor, and it just like it is a critical hit there, you know.
Yeah.
You grievously injured this person because maybe your first attack didn't work, but it positioned you for the second, or maybe it opened up someone else's attack on the immediate next turn, or it angered the person because you distracted them, you know. You distract them with your attack, and so they're not ready for the next one, or, you know, there are a ton of ways to not lose momentum just because something doesn't work exactly the way you wanted it to.
Yeah, and there's so much more.
Just keep it going.
You know, compare that to, you miss your first attack, the second is a crit, 46 damage, okay, next turn.
Yeah. You know, those are totally different experiences, despite fundamentally them meaning the exact same thing.
Yeah.
It's just flavor. You know, you add that flavor and that fluidity and that momentum to things, and it helps keep people from getting bogged down in failures and from losing interest.
And it is something that you are not going to be good at immediately.
No. And sometimes you'll say something and it just sounds so stupid. It happens sometimes.
It'll sound stupid, it'll sound repetitive maybe. It is something that takes a lot of practice to get good at.
Yeah. Luckily, I don't do a ton of combat, so I don't have to worry about
Yes,
that specific kind of problem very frequently.
And depending on your group, it may not be something they enjoy. Your group may just want to do the power gamey stuff, not really care how it affects how it looks.
Does a 29 hit the enemy's AC? Man, it sure does. Go ahead and roll damage.
Man, I want to be an
88 damage. Go ahead.
I want to be an opportunity to say no to that someday.
Thinking about the shield spell.
Yeah.
The shield spell. Sometimes Strahd is mean. Sometimes you can have an attack that rolls a 29, and that enemy just inexplicably has like a 28 AC and they cast shield and it doesn't hit.
Yes.
Or like a 25 AC and they cast shield and it doesn't hit because now their AC is 30.
But yeah, I mean, getting descriptive with all sorts of things. Make your world feel like this breathing thing, you know. Describe the noises they hear as this lock kind of clicks open rather than just you pick the lock.
Yeah.
Or even just describe where they're walking if you don't want to do random encounters. Just how their travel looks, how it's going. Maybe some ambient horror if you were in that style of game.
Maybe just some kind of... One of the things that I talk about a lot is not just combat encounters, but environmental and social encounters. You know, you don't have to run into a pack of wolves and fight them and kill them and survive to have an interesting time on the road. That is not the only way to make things interesting. In fact, at least to me, it's one of the least interesting things that can happen while you're traveling.
Yeah.
Finding things or meeting people or having experiences that you can't have in the city that you're going to or coming from. That is interesting, more than just stabbing an animal.
Yeah, and I would highly recommend, if you do random encounters, at least give them some sort of story beat, some sort of story lead, some sort of side plot they can lead into.
Yeah, something that could at least be vaguely relevant.
Because just, these wolves come from the woods.
And for some random reason, they want to kill all of your party members.
Especially because, for most parties, a group of wolves is not a threat.
Yeah.
Nor is it a satisfying death if one of your players dies.
Yeah. So if you decide, I really want my players to have a combat encounter here, I'm just going to look in the monster manual and I'm going to see wolves and I'm going to say, okay, here's some wolves. First of all, why would a pack of wolves attack someone who clearly knows how to who casts Fireball? Why would they, if you cast a Fireball, stay in that situation? And the answer to that could be, they don't, they run when your wizard casts Fireball. Alternatively, it could lead to the realization that these wolves are so malnourished and starved from some external problem that they are willing to risk death to, like, bite a chunk out of your arm because they're so hungry. And that leads to some kind of other thing that might be going on in the area, and that's interesting.
And it's a whole other plot point, you know?
Yeah. And maybe it ties into something else you're doing, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe the problem being caused is caused by someone who's also causing other problems, even if they aren't directly related. You'd be surprised how much tie-in there can be to just seemingly random things, and you don't have to make it connect immediately.
Yeah, and if you're adjusting from having random encounters to not having random encounters, your games will seem shorter.
Yeah.
You seem like they get more places faster, and that may scare you, especially when you look at Critical Role, who, you know...
They take a while to do things sometimes.
Takes a while to do a lot of things. You may be very...
And I know I was really insecure when I started DMing, and I was like, man, I hate doing random combat encounters. But there's nothing else to do in this scenario.
Like,
and at some point, if you don't want to do it, you're just like, okay, they're going to get there faster. Either I have to come up with another kind of encounter to give them, or if that doesn't make sense for whatever reason, they're going to get there faster, and I have to have a reason that they get there faster.
How did Curse of Strahd take dice camera action 33 episodes? And it takes me a week to go through it. Well, and dice camera action doesn't even have random encounters, but I'll tell you this much in a home game. If you're playing more frequently or longer than a podcast, it's going to feel shorter than the podcast you probably
we play D&D basically every day.
Yes.
Sometimes we batch record sessions for even up to like a couple weeks in advance because we don't want to just play for an hour every couple days.
Yes.
So we're usually ahead on D&D, which gets a little complicated sometimes, but that's okay. But, like, knowing that, you know... What was I talking about? Help.
You had mentioned, like, the time span between...
Yes.
Yes.
If you're playing... Sorry, everybody. I have ADHD.
Oh, me too.
If you're playing a game, like, 8 hours a day, every other day, that's very different than, like, a 3 or 4 hour podcast episode once a week.
Yeah.
Like, things will feel faster depending on... And that seems like kind of an obvious statement to an outsider, but I often feel very insecure about, like, man, how are my players so far through all of this stuff when we've only played, like, a few hours worth of content? And then I'm like, it's because we're moving at a very rapid pace for one reason or another.
Yes.
I have to remind myself, if I'm cutting out all the random encounters that these people are supposed to have and only putting in the plot points that I deem relevant in every place that they go to, of course it's going to be shorter.
And you'll be stunned how fast it feels without random encounters.
Yes. But it is not necessarily a bad thing, and if you don't like random encounters, it is okay to have things feel fast as long as your players are also okay with them. Some people really don't want to spend forever having to manage rations on the road.
Yes.
Some people, that's super boring. I don't track ammunition or rations or anything like that because
Or
I think it's boring.
carry weight or any of that, but some
Yeah.
people really like to do that. And
The only time I've ever asked about carry weight is, like, in a situation where it would really be relevant to, like, can this person feasibly drag this person out of a bad situation
Yeah.
with everything on them or something.
there is no real wrong way to play D&D.
Yeah. If you need to drop rules like that out of existence for your own enjoyment, that's fine. Whether it's something as simple as changing how much damage you roll on a crit, or something as drastic as, like, removing an entire plot point from a pre-written module, you know, as long as it furthers the story you're telling, it is okay to change it.
Yeah. Or if it just fits your personal tastes.
Yeah. There is another thing that I'm going to kind of talk about that we mentioned a little bit earlier. I talked about the Matt Mercer effect in the other episode. We have talked about the Matt Mercer effect in other videos. We've talked about what this boils down to is don't try to be something you're not, and I don't mean that in a condescending way.
We've talked about this a little in this episode too.
Yeah.
But it's so important.
It is. What I am saying here when I say set reasonable expectations for yourself is not, you'll never be as good as a good DM. You'll never be good enough to put your content on the internet if that was something you wanted to do. I feel that way about myself, and yet here I am putting my content on the internet, because fuck my problems.
And even so, you watch people. Matt Mercer was not born Matt Mercer.
No.
He was born Matt Miller.
He sure was. And he was not born a professional voice
No.
actor. That just kind of happened as his life evolved. And I'm not telling you that you'll never be as talented as someone like Matt Mercer. You might already be as talented as Matt Mercer. There is a ton of talent in the world that goes unnoticed by the vast majority of the world, whether because they don't get exposure at the right time, they don't care about getting exposure, and they just want to do this for their friends, you know? I guarantee you there are hundreds of DMs in the world who are just as good as Matt Mercer, who just don't care about putting it on the internet, and they'd rather just have fun in their house.
Could be as good as Matt Mercer if they have the time and money and resources to commit to this.
Could be as good as Matt Mercer if they wanted to play the game more. You know, maybe it's not their thing. They're a great storyteller, but D&D isn't their preferred format.
And you will hear a lot of people in this hobby tell you that you'll never be
that good, and don't try to be that good.
There is this narrative that exists that I despise, that most D&D groups are this, like, beer and pretzels joking around. It's a narrative that comes from a lot of guys that started playing D&D as cishet white guys in high school with only other cishet white guys.
And that's not to say that a bunch of cishet white guys playing D&D is a bad thing.
No.
But of all the demographics who are not going to branch out, realistically, that's probably the one. Especially if you start it as, like, this, oh, we're just gonna goof around and make stupid joke characters while we play D&D, and that can happen with any kind of group of people.
Yeah.
If all you ever want to do is goof around and make joke characters and do dungeon crawls, that's fine. But I think a lot more people than a lot of people realize or want to accept really do enjoy storytelling and really do tell good stories.
Yes.
It is human nature. One of the fundamental truths of human nature, ever since the first humans existed, is that they created art and told stories. Oral storytelling is a huge tradition in, like, basically every culture that's ever existed on Earth. And maybe on other planets, for all. People want to tell stories, and people are surprisingly good at telling stories because communication and collaboration is a human nature trait.
Yes. There is this belief that kind of persists here, and I guess we're talking now about D&D culture as well as DMing, but if you're learning to DM, you're going to understand the culture of this.
Yes.
You'll find many a player, and many a DM, especially those that have played since older editions, who think that Crit Roll and Adventure Zone and Dimension 20 are not real D&D.
And some people will say, like, oh, they're too dramatic, they're too serious, they take this game too seriously, it's supposed to be about killing monsters and drinking beer.
Yes. And that you will never find a group like that, and that your expectations should be this kind of fun, low stakes, a little bit goofy thing, and I don't subscribe to that narrative.
I don't think that that's the only thing you'll ever find, and I know it's not the only thing you'll ever find, because everyone I've ever met who enjoys playing D&D and is not like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know everyone, and there are definitely people who enjoy playing that way, but I have heard dozens, maybe hundreds of stories of people who started playing a campaign as some dumb, jokey character, and all of their friends started playing in this campaign as dumb, jokey characters, and by the end of that, they were crying after the boss battle, after kind of the final fight, because, like, they were so invested in this story, and despite their characters being made as a joke, it immersed itself in the story so well that it brought, you know, it's the kind of thing, you know, the whole trope of, like, oh, this could make a grown man cry, it's so powerful. Yeah. It's like that. There are so many people who are like, you know, D&D is stupid and low stakes and, like, jokey, and it's not meant to be serious, and it's not meant to be emotional, and I don't think that's how the vast majority of people feel about it.
And I've seen people get turned off from the game because people are like, stop taking it so seriously, you know, why are you trying to stop me from having fun? Why are you trying to stop me from making jokes?
Yeah.
A lot of times those jokes are really racist or sexist.
Or insensitive, just in general. Yeah, they're just not fun. They're not funny. And if that's a group you find yourself in and you don't like that, one way or another, you know, if you want to have a super low-stakes, goofy game, you can find that. But if you want to find and play in, or find and DM for a serious game where you get invested in the story and the characters in that story, you can find that, and you can be the DM that gets people into that kind of play. You can.
That being said, this is how you run into players that can expect you to be Matt Mercer.
And you have to set their expectations as well as your own.
This is how you can find yourself expecting and being down on yourself for not being Matt Mercer. Understand that just because you're playing... I think people have gotten this advice that you're never going to be Matt Mercer so twisted to be like...
You'll never be any good.
Or you'll never be able to play a game close to that style.
Yeah.
And that's not the case here.
No. You don't need to be a professional voice actor to make a character seem cool. You don't need to be a professional storyteller to tell a cool story. And you can't set a standard of one specific person as the end-all be-all of how you want to play, because that might not be quite your storytelling style. You can have a story just as captivating and moving as something on a famous D&D podcast or show. And it could be something totally different from anything anyone else has ever done, because that's how you play and how your players play. You don't have to be a professional anything to make something fun. The point of it is fun, not like recording with quality mics and getting up on a screen and having everything go perfectly, because you're that good. The point of D&D is that it's an imperfect game and things will go wrong, and you enjoy that because it's interesting. You don't have to have these crazy skills to just enjoy D&D, and to be a good DM, you can be a good DM without having exactly the same skill set as a famous DM.
Yeah, and you know, holding yourself to that standard, it's never going to help you.
It's going to keep you confined in something that might not feel good to you and might not feel good to anyone else. You set the standard for yourself and it becomes the only thing you feel like you should ever do, and if you don't do that, you'll feel like you won't be having fun, even though it might feel more fun for you without that implication of what you have to be.
Yeah, so don't let the belief that you'll never be Matt Mercer hold you down from playing a story-based game, but also at the same time,
don't let other people's expectations of you being Matt Mercer ruin everyone's game.
Yeah. I guess what we're saying here is...
Be yourself.
Be yourself. You can enjoy D&D as a storytelling game, as a game with as much emotional depth and resonance as something like Crit Role. Maybe not necessarily the quality or the originality,
but it can still be fun, and it can still be moving, and it can still make a grown man cry.
And it doesn't have to be like, okay, this game either has to be perfect production quality, or just goofy, silly shit.
Yeah. Anything in between that is always just as welcome as anything else with the right group of people.
As long as you're having fun, you're playing D&D, right? And your players are having fun.
So kind of one of the last things I want to touch on here is, this is a phrase that I have recently implemented into my brain as a player and as a DM, for kind of my motto of how I want to run games and play in games. And that motto is, this is kind of a thing that I used to say to my friends all the time, and this is, I think, a thing that a lot of people kind of just say at its base form, is have fun, be safe, make good choices. My preferred way to look at it is have fun, be safe, make interesting choices.
Not great life advice.
No, not great life advice, but as a character
Yes.
in a story, not all the choices you have to make are the things that are good for you or good for the character you're telling the story of.
There's an episode coming up in our actual play where one of the characters makes the dumbest decision possible, but God, is it interesting.
Yes. Some people in real life, actually everyone in real life at some point, is going to do something that is objectively stupid, but it's gonna make sense. You know, there's the whole, like, there's a lot of kind of negativity around the phrase, oh, it's what my character would do, because what that phrase conjures to mind is murder hobo, setting ignoring player who just wants to be a jerk and cause problems and excuses it by saying it's what my character would do.
Yes.
That does not have to be what that phrase means. You can say, you know, as a player, I recognize that this is a terrible, terrible decision and it is going to get my character hurt, but it's the only thing that makes sense for them to do in this setting because they don't know what I know. It's kind of, it ties into metagaming in a lot of ways. You can say, you know, yes, objectively, it's a stupid idea for this character to pick a fight with this other character, but this is something really, really important to them. Of course they're going to fight this NPC on this issue that is, like, hugely important to their personality and existence. Maybe it's a bad idea, maybe they know it's a bad idea, but it's what their moral standpoint is. You know, they feel obligated to stand up for this person or stand up for what they believe in, even if it's a bad idea objectively. That's what "it's what my character would do" should mean.
Yeah.
And that's what make an interesting choice means. Both as a player and as a DM, you can utilize that and do that sort of thing.
And you gotta be sure your group is okay with that style of group you're in. If you're in a more power gaming group, there are some very interesting character choices that your group will just hate.
Yeah.
I have played a character before that, at a very important point, did not attack out of fear.
Yeah.
Or out of self-loathing.
Yeah.
They
They decided it wasn't worth it. It just, their mental state was in a place where attacking and doing what was best for the situation did not make sense for them. That was a huge character moment.
Yes.
Uh,
But if I were playing in a power gamer group, they would have fucking murdered me.
yeah, they would have killed you on the spot for that decision, yeah. Because it wouldn't matter in that setting.
No.
But it did matter in the setting that was in. So yeah, it doesn't have to be a good choice or a bad choice for the characters that you're playing, and you should encourage this in your players as well. Make interesting choices. Make choices for the NPCs, and have your players make choices as players that drive the narrative. It does not necessarily always have to be for the best.
Yes.
Sometimes you can do something that goes terribly wrong, and that can drive the narrative way further than any success ever could.
Exactly.
On the other two kind of points there, have fun and be safe are the other two. TTRPGs, D&D, but also every other system that exists, they're about having fun. Keep that in mind. Make sure that your players are enjoying themselves. Make sure that you're enjoying yourself. But also make sure everyone is safe and comfortable. We talked about this earlier with the idea of making sure that the decisions you make pertaining to what happens to your characters that your players are playing, make sure that they're comfortable with what those changes might be before you just throw them at them.
Minding and respecting boundaries are so huge. Respecting the X card, knowing the X card.
Yeah. Trigger lists, X card, it's what, lines and veils, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Yeah.
Making
All those kinds of tools.
Making the table a safe space so your players know, I can use the X card without being ridiculed or having to defend myself.
Yeah. If your players need to know, if I pull the X card, nobody's going to get mad at me about it. We're going to stop and we're going to respect them. You, as the DM, are the most important point of contact for that, but it is also your job to make sure other players are equally respectful of that. And if they're not, you need to have a serious conversation with them, because if one player isn't having fun, no one else is going to have fun for much longer.
Yes. D&D is a lot like sex. Consent is important, and it's better in a group.
I have a question.
I will not be taking questions at this time.
Understandable. I have no questions. I guess. I'm not sure I agree with that for everyone, but I will take your word for it in this specific scenario, because I don't want to derail the video. But yes, make sure that your players feel safe and comfortable with the choices you make, and the choices they make, and the choices their other players and friends make. X card, lines and veils. just having a trigger list, having plans in place if someone does go a territory that's uncomfortable, if they want to pull something back, if they initially are like, adding that to my backstory is okay, and then they're like, never mind, this made me way more uncomfortable than I realized, how can we change that? Accommodate for that. Be ready to help people feel comfortable with what you're doing, especially if something changes in their life that they suddenly need to change, that sort of thing.
And not to derail, we talk about, it's talked about a lot, consent is sexy for reasons. Consent is fun.
Yes.
It is so much more fun to... a surprise is great.
Yeah.
But revealing your surprise to the shock and horror of your friend group, that doesn't feel good unless you're kind of a terrible person.
It should be the shock and awe and excitement of your friend group. It should never be, oh god, what the hell is my DM doing? I didn't realize they were this bad of a person. Yeah. It should be, oh god, what the hell is my DM doing? That's so cool.
Yeah, consent is fun. Consent,
it is.
If you run it by something, even if it spoils the surprise,
or even if you keep it vague, either way, it is okay to touch on a little bit of that beforehand to make sure everyone's going to be safe and have fun.
And you're like, hey, if you're planning on killing off a character from that person's backstory, you're like, hey, are you okay? Is there anyone that you don't want me to touch?
Yeah. What if this is changeable, and what if this needs to stay how it is?
Is there any character that if I killed them off, you'd be really deeply upset, even if there was a way to bring them back?
Yeah. What are your boundaries on things pertaining to your backstory? How much can I use, and what ways can I use it before it gets uncomfortable, and how can I avoid making those things uncomfortable?
You can hint without directly going overboard.
Yeah. There are ways to say, I want to kill one of your NPCs in your backstory. How can I make that work? Without saying, I want to kill one of the NPCs in your backstory. How can I make that work?
Yes. Speaking of doing things to players' backstories, if you have a problem with a player, please address it outside of the game.
Yeah, don't punish their character, because that just ruins it for everyone. You can and will have more success if you talk through a problem with the person causing the problem instead of the character played by the person causing the problem.
Yeah, if you're like...
That just doesn't help.
If you're like, I fucking hate warlocks, but I'm not going to say that no one can play the class, so I'm just going to make it miserable to be a warlock. Yeah. I'm gonna punish the warlock player until they die, and make it so miserable they don't want to play a warlock anymore.
At that point, just tell them you don't want anyone to play a warlock. Like, why is that so hard? Just be upfront with things that you want to have or not have in your game, and you can expect the same from everyone else. They should be allowed to do that, and so should you. That is not a shitty double standard that should be held. You don't have to be okay with everything just because your players are okay with things. And vice versa. Yeah. Your players don't have to accept something just because you think it's funny or cool. It has to be consensual, and it has to be respectful.
Yeah, one of the best conversations I've had was with a DM at a college thing that I didn't go to for too long. But it was a thing of, I'm like, I would like to play a ranger, but I wanted to look at Ranger Revised, and they're like, I'm not really a big fan of Ranger Revised. I don't think I want to do that, and I'm like, if that's the case, can I not do a ranger then? Yeah. And they're like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
That is a totally normal, good dialogue, instead of them punishing me or nerfing a bunch of Ranger Revised stuff.
Yeah. To make it basically the same as what it was that you wanted to change in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Feel free to tell your players no, which we kind of already said, but, like, if someone, saying yes to character requests and interest, that's good, but if someone as a player is being disruptive or causing problems with the things they want to explore, if they're making other people uncomfortable, whether that's with triggering kinds of content or with romantic or sexual advances towards other characters, player or otherwise, that other people have said, I don't want this in the game, anything like that, if someone's being disruptive, you're kind of the group's, like, default leader. Everything kind of falls back on you, and people will look to you to make decisions about that sort of thing. It is your job, if someone is hurting the group, to get them to stop, or to tell them to leave.
Yeah.
And I hate saying that, because in an ideal world, you can always find a way to get that person to work with you, but sometimes people just do this to do it. And if someone's gonna cause problems and you tell them to stop and they don't, at some point you have to be ready, as the DM, to say, okay, this is not fun anymore because you are acting like this. You can either stop acting like this or you can leave the group.
And, it doesn't mean the player is a bad person,
No.
necessarily.
It just means that their style doesn't work with anyone else's, and they're not respecting that when they continue to play.
I have had friends who I love dearly, who I would never play D&D with again in my life.
Yeah. And I have people like that for myself as well, yeah. It is okay to not mesh with a player's style. It doesn't make them an inherently terrible person. It is kind of a shitty thing to do if you ask them to stop doing it, and they, instead of saying, this is just how I play, they say, suck it up because this is how I play.
Yeah.
You can say, I don't know if this playstyle fits with our group. Their response should be, okay, either they will change that playstyle as much as they can to accommodate that, or they will find another group because no one's going to have fun either way that way.
I have a really good friend of mine who talks constantly when we talk one-on-one about wanting to play a serious, dedicated, really important, really impactful crit roll style D&D campaign. Yeah. But whenever we sit down to the group, especially of his friends, he's more of a traditional guy.
Yeah. Just a goofy, funny person.
Yeah, traditional, cis guy who wants to be seen as kind of funny, wants to be seen as kind of laid back and chill. And he'll make characters that are largely jokes. He will fall into murder hobo tropes. He will not kind of buy into the plot of the game. And he's talked about this so many times about wanting to do this, but every time you get him in a group with people who he's self-conscious about affecting his...
He wants to impress people. And anyone can want to impress people. It's not necessarily a demographic thing. There are demographics that do that a lot. But fundamentally, if your players are having issues because they want to appear a certain way in the game, you need to make sure that they understand that either they can appear that way and play that kind of game, or they can appear the way everyone else is appearing and play the game that they want to play.
And it might be a matter of group. It might be a matter of this person needs a different group.
This person needs a different style of play,
Yeah.
Maybe they are nervous around some of the people in this group for some reason, and you can work around that, or they can work around that.
Yeah, maybe the, murder hobo type player wants to... That's how they want to play, and they just want to vibe for your group, and then you find another group. Or maybe the person who's doing this might be better served in a group of people that aren't their high school buddies. Maybe this friend of mine would be better off playing with a group of more roleplay oriented and more progressivism oriented people that maybe they aren't that close to, and maybe they
don't feel as much of a need to act a certain way.
Yeah, to act a certain way to impress.
And fundamentally, if someone's not vibing with the group, you don't need to be a jerk about it, but you do need to, at some point, intervene and say, hey, there's some reason this isn't working. What can we do to fix that? If we can't fix that, how can we transition out of this smoothly, because this is making other people uncomfortable or keeping them from having fun. So what that boils down to is you are kind of the last line of defense against people who are causing problems intentionally or otherwise, and you have to take that up. I feel kind of bad basically ending it on that note, because that's kind of a depressing thing to talk about. So what I want to remind you of is DMing is super fun, and it is collaborative, it is a story, it is a group effort to tell a great story. Just because sometimes things don't work out doesn't mean that you cannot have an incredible time. Hopefully, watching this, listening to this, has given you some ideas of things that you can do to improve the time that you have, and the level of fun that you experience in a game. Use this to flesh out plots, settings, plans for your games. Please don't get down on yourself when things go wrong or when you or someone else makes mistakes. Be forgiving to yourself. Your players will be forgiving to you if you are forgiving to yourself and them. Just kind of, enjoy the experience. Let yourself grow through this naturally. You will never be 100% perfect at everything when you start. And DMing has a learning curve. But it is so enjoyable and fun, and it is so moving when your friends and the people you're playing with get that invested in something that they cry at a pivotal moment, or just freak out with excitement when a huge change or a plot twist happens. Just let it all come to you and let it all flow. You don't have to get bogged down in the details, and you don't have to get bogged down in being perfect.
It is and can be so rewarding. There are things I think about all the time that have happened to me.
Yeah.
That I'm just like, man, that is one of the most rewarding, gratifying things as a DM. If you watch, crit roll, the reaction of the players, the idea of getting a reaction like that to really anything you do as a DM is just... There's not a lot else like it, you know?
It is such a rewarding experience to give someone else that kind of experience for themselves. If you've played in a game and you're just starting DMing, try to remember how those high points in your games that you played in made you feel, and just hold on to that when you DM. Because you will give those moments to other people, and the feeling that evoked in you, when you evoke that in someone else, it might be 10 times as good.
There's this moment that I was terrified was going to end badly as a DM. In one of the first campaign I actually played with you.
Yes.
Where I was DMing, a homebrew setting.
Mm-hmm.
And you weren't the player of this.
Yeah.
But I was actually terrified that something went horribly wrong, and it turned out it is one of the most gratifying DM moments ever.
Yes.
I had a player character meet their sister
mm-hmm.
In a town. And very swiftly after that, their sister sold them out, betrayed them.
Yes.
And we were playing over Discord chat.
Yeah.
And when I said, you see your sister standing outside next to this troop of drow that have surrounded this cave that she led you into.
Yeah.
This player just goes, "Oh, you motherfucker."
Yeah.
And I'm like...
It was just this... It was a whole thing.
And I'm like, oh shit, are they, mad at me?
Yeah.
And there's this pause. And I think they kind of realized they're in character.
Yeah. In character. I say that in character. But yeah, just the response was so visceral that they almost kind of forgot that this was just a story at the time.
Yeah.
That this wasn't happening in they were so immersed in it that it felt real in that moment, and they forgot that you are the DM and not this traitorous sister.
Yeah.
And it was cool. It was so intense. Their reaction was so strong to it. I remember that very vividly. That was super fun. And then when that got turned around again.
Yeah.
And then you doubled it. You double plot twisted it, and it was awesome. And the response was twice as cool that time.
Yeah, I'll have to tell the Nundry story for Game Tales.
You will have to tell that story for Game Tales. But yeah, DMing is fun. DMing is super awesome. I love doing it. I was super, super nervous when I started, and it has definitely come out to be one of the best decisions I ever made, and there was a learning curve for me, and there will be a learning curve for you, but it is so rewarding.
The biggest word I'll ever use to describe DMing is gratifying.
Yes, it is gratifying. It is so insanely gratifying to create something that moving and powerful.
Speaking of gratifying, do leave a comment on this video.
Yeah.
And we will respond to most of them. We will read all of them.
Yes. Tell us stories about your first game as a DM. Tell us things that you would like to see your DM do based on this video. Tell us things that you learned from this video that you'd like to implement. Give us criticism on how we DM our games. We're open to constructive criticism. Don't be a jerk, but
I'm gonna actually have a question of the day for those of you that got to the end.
Who watched both parts of this long video.
Parts of it and got to the end of this. And I want you to, just to know that you've gotten to this point, I want you to leave... what word should they leave in their comment?
Oh, does it have to be a word? It can't be a question?
It is, but I just want them to... Just so we know they got all the way there.
I don't know. I think we should just ask them a question.
Alright, yeah, so I have a question for you.
Okay.
A question for you in the comments. And we'll pin the best one of these.
Yes, we will.
What is your best reaction that your table of players has ever given you as a DM?
Yes. If you've never DM'd before, feel free to put kind of the reverse of that, but ideally, maybe first you leave a comment as a player, and then you come back after taking some tips from this and starting to DM your own game, and you tell us, you update that comment and say, whoa, guys, this tutorial helped me do this super cool moment. Or maybe we didn't help at all and it just inspired you in a different way. Either way,
let's go ahead.
We want to hear about your successes in this way.
Let's expand the scope to basically just be, what's your favorite reaction you've seen from players? Either you were the player, you were the DM,
It was other player in your group of players.
Or, hell, even you can leave moments from streams of games like Crit Roll or various other.
And maybe we'll go check them out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll respond being
You
like,
know-
whoa, that was a super cool moment, you were right.
We've been wanting to do Crit Roll related top 10s content. We're not turning this into a Crit Roll fan channel.
No.
But
Even though we do love it so much.
we've wanted to do top 10s and ranked on Critical Role stuff. We are probably going to end up doing Crit Roll characters ranked.
And we were going to get so much hate for it, and I'm so scared.
But-
You want to do Crit Roll characters ranked. I want to hide in a hole when we post that video.
But a video that I want to do really badly is top 10, Critical Role reactions.
Yeah.
So if you are a fan of Crit Roll, and you think some of their reactions are cool, go ahead and leave some in the comments and I will check them out.
Yeah, and maybe we will use them in a video. We will even maybe highlight your comment as a part of that.
We'll credit you.
We will.
We'll pay you an exposure.
So true. Can I have 10 exposure dollars to go buy something from the exposure store? Just kidding. Send me chips instead. Send us chips.
We'll pay you in chips. And you'll pay us in chips.
You'll pay us in chips. This is a hell of a relationship dynamic.
We mean poker chips, by the way, right?
No. I mean snacks.
Potato chips.
I want snacks. This is not about money for me. This is about snacks.
You're a little podling.
I need to snack. As one of the greatest DMs I've ever seen said. I'm a little podling and I need to snack. Anyway, thank you for coming. Leave comments. Let us know your greatest reaction stories as a DM, as a player, as a viewer of another group of players and DM. Just tell us what you think. Tell us the cool stuff that's happened to you, and we will read it, and we will respond to it, and we will pin the best one, and we will see you next time.
We may ask you if we could use it for Gamtail as well.
Yes.
Be sure to check out the rest of our channel. We do daily uploads. We do some stuff on Spotify.
We put all of this stuff, all the Academy stuff, and we put all of our actual play on Spotify.
Yeah. Also on our Spotify, the actual play, we have a channel here on YouTube for actual plays.
Yep.
That
We have
uploads
a
4 days a week.
We're still sorting that out. Don't quote me on that.
And then we have
Hopefully by the time we post this video, that'll be sorted.
and we have a short channel which uploads 2 videos a week.
Day.
2 videos a day.
2 videos a day. Hell, I'm doing so many videos. Those are all me. I do all the shorts. Pray for me. Send me chips.
Short chips.
Short
like
chips.
the bags, the like variety pack bags.
Yeah, the little tiny ones, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, let us know how everything is. Check out all of the rest of our videos, and we will see you on the next episode of the Academy, and also probably in several videos before that. Bye!
Thank you for watching this video from College of Lore. Remember to like this video, subscribe to join the party, and have a fantastic adventure.